Naomi's mornings had always felt like an unspoken mystery, one that she couldn't quite grasp yet had grown used to over the years. Every day she would wake up with a sense of refreshing vitality, a lightness that seemed to lift her out of bed even when the hours of sleep she managed were fewer than ideal. It had become a part of her routine, something she simply accepted, though she never truly understood how or why it happened. The nights, however, were often restless. Naomi was no stranger to the never-ending to-do list that life seemed to present: work responsibilities, social obligations, and the ever-demanding needs of her home. Despite these demands, she rarely had time to wind down properly. Most nights she would fall into bed, exhausted, and immediately fall asleep, only to wake up what felt like moments later, refreshed beyond reason. The heaviness of her schedule would catch up with her only once the first sip of coffee hit her lips the following morning. She would think to herself that it must have been the exhaustion that left her feeling so energetic, but that didn't explain the inexplicable clarity of her mind. As she moved through her daily routine, Naomi had become accustomed to her mornings starting with a deep sense of renewal. It was almost as if she had slept for hours on end, though she knew that it had never been the case. She would shuffle into her kitchen with the usual grogginess, but find that once she had a hot cup of coffee in her hand, the fog that had clouded her mind would lift, and she would feel sharp, focused, and ready to tackle the day. It was on one particular morning, though, that Naomi's colleagues started to take notice of her peculiar state of perpetual freshness. As the clock ticked past mid-morning and Naomi tried to keep her usual tiredness at bay, Lisa, one of her close friends at work, leaned over Naomi's desk with a look of playful curiosity. "Naomi, you're like a whole new person every morning. What's your secret?" she asked, the sly smile playing on her lips. Naomi, not quite sure how to answer, shrugged her shoulders, laughing it off. "I have no idea," she replied with a chuckle. "I just wake up like this, I guess." David, who often made a game out of teasing his colleagues, piped up from across the room. "Maybe it's all those 8 hours of sleep you're getting every night." Naomi let out a laugh, rolling her eyes. "If only," she replied. "I'm lucky if I get 5 hours of sleep a night." Lisa, still not convinced, narrowed her eyes and leaned closer. "You must have some kind of secret ritual. Tell me your magic potion." Naomi played along, though deep down she still felt confused by it all. "Ah yes, it's a mysterious elixir I drink every night," she teased. "Keeps me feeling fresh as a daisy." But even as she said these words, she felt the familiar sense of unease, the nagging feeling that there was something about her mornings that she had never fully understood, something that went beyond any simple explanation. Despite the lighthearted exchange, Naomi's mind was left turning. Her co-workers' jokes and observations reminded her of the strange mornings she had grown so accustomed to. She was never tired, even when it seemed impossible not to be. Something was happening, something that seemed to be connected to the time she spent sleeping. The usual explanations: too much caffeine, good genetics, didn't seem to fit, and Naomi found herself wondering if there was something else at play, something she hadn't considered before. For the most part, Naomi had learned to ignore these fleeting thoughts and simply appreciate the energy that seemed to appear each morning. But as the days passed, something began to feel different. She started noticing a peculiar detail, one that had escaped her attention until now. Milo, her loyal golden retriever, was always there when she woke up. Every morning, without fail, he would be seated at the edge of her bed, eyes bright, looking at her with a calm, knowing gaze. He had always been a part of her mornings, of course, but there was something new about his presence. At first, Naomi dismissed it as coincidence. Milo had always been a comforting companion, but it struck her as odd how, no matter how little sleep she got, the moments she shared with him in the mornings always seemed peaceful, almost therapeutic. She found herself patting his head as she got up from bed, a routine gesture, but each time she did, she was filled with a strange sense of assurance. It wasn't just the usual warmth one might feel from their pet, it felt deeper, more connected. One morning, after a particularly long day at work, Naomi was especially exhausted. She could feel the weight of the day pressing against her eyelids, her body begging for sleep, but as usual, she awoke early and found herself inexplicably energized. Milo, as always, was waiting at her bedside, his intelligent eyes fixed on her as though he was already aware of her every thought. Naomi scratched behind his ears as she usually did. "Taking care of me again, Milo?" She chuckled, asking the rhetorical question with affection. Milo blinked slowly, his calm gaze unwavering as he sat at attention. Naomi couldn't help but think there was something more to him than the simple companionship of a pet. It wasn't that she had never noticed his watchful presence before, but today something felt different. As if on cue, a thought crept into her mind, one that she quickly dismissed but couldn't fully shake. Could Milo be watching over her, in a way she hadn't realized? The thought lingered as she moved through her morning routine, her mind flickering back to moments where Milo seemed unusually aware. She had dismissed it before as simply the bond between a dog and his owner, but now, the connection felt almost otherworldly. There had been mornings, for instance, when Naomi had woken up with a peculiar sense of peace, even after poor sleep. She would find herself inexplicably well-rested, her body rejuvenated in ways that didn't align with the sleep she had or hadn't. And Milo was always there, watching her with that same patient, wise look. Later that afternoon, Naomi found herself musing over the strange sequence of events that had become her mornings. It wasn't just that she felt energetic, it was a deeper, unshakable peace that she had never fully understood. She started to wonder if Milo in some way was the source of that energy, that inexplicable peace. It was during one of these moments of reflection, while sitting at her desk at work, that Naomi's mind truly began to wander. She thought back to the past few months, remembering the subtle moments when she had felt unusually light and at ease in the mornings. Each time it was when Milo was there, waiting patiently for her to wake. Could it be possible that he was doing something more than just lying by her side? Could Milo, in some sense, be the reason why she felt so unshakably rejuvenated? The more Naomi thought about it, the more she realized that the connection between her and Milo went beyond that of a typical pet and owner. There was something deeper, something unspoken that seemed to define their relationship. Every morning, as she awoke to find him at her bedside, Naomi felt as though she was being cared for in a way that went beyond anything she could explain. She had always taken Milo's loyalty for granted, but now she began to feel a profound sense of gratitude toward him, as if he had been silently watching over her, ensuring she woke up every morning feeling renewed. It was a mystery she couldn't ignore anymore. She had always thought of Milo as just a dog, a companion to fill her life with affection and warmth, but now she was beginning to wonder if there was more to his role in her life than she had ever considered. Naomi decided to pay closer attention. She began to observe Milo more carefully, noticing every little gesture, every look he gave her. He remained calm, unwavering, always there at her side, silently supporting her. And with each passing day, Naomi began to realize that the vitality she felt in the mornings wasn't something magical or coincidental. It was something that came from Milo, her quiet, steadfast companion, who was more than just a dog. He was her guardian, watching over her, ensuring that she woke up refreshed and ready to face whatever life had in store. Karen's visit came as a welcome break from the regular monotony of Naomi's work week, a chance to reconnect with an old friend. It had been months since they had last seen each other in person, and Naomi had missed their easy camaraderie, the way they could pick up a conversation as though no time had passed, even after weeks or months of separation. Their friendship had been forged during their college years, and though life had pulled them in different directions, they had managed to stay in touch through calls, texts, and the occasional weekend visit. Karen's birthday was the perfect excuse to reconnect. Naomi had decided that, this year, she would make the day special for her friend. She spent hours preparing for the evening, a celebration that, while simple, would be filled with joy, laughter, and the kind of carefree enjoyment they had once shared before adulthood had wrapped them in its demanding embrace. Naomi wanted to ensure that Karen felt celebrated and loved, and so she meticulously planned the evening, from the gift she had carefully chosen to the dinner reservations at a charming little restaurant that Karen had always loved. The evening started off just as Naomi had hoped. The two women shared stories over dinner, reminiscing about old times while enjoying the rich flavors of their meal. Karen laughed easily, her eyes sparkling with the kind of warmth that Naomi remembered from their younger days. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and Naomi couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. For a few hours it felt as if nothing had changed between them, as though time had slowed, allowing them to share the simple joy of being in each other's company. As the evening drew to a close, Naomi could see that Karen was beginning to feel the effects of the wine they had shared. It wasn't unusual for them to have a little too much fun when they were together. After all, they hadn't seen each other in ages, and the drinks only added to the festive atmosphere. But as the night wore on, it became clear that Karen wouldn't be in any condition to drive herself home. Naomi, ever the thoughtful friend, immediately insisted that Karen stay with her for the night. She was already halfway through the plan before Karen had a chance to protest, grabbing her keys and ushering her out the door, knowing that it was the safest option for both of them. The drive back to Naomi's apartment was filled with light-hearted chatter, and Karen leaned back in her seat, visibly relaxed, as they navigated the familiar streets. When they arrived at Naomi's apartment, Milo was there to greet them, his tail wagging furiously as he trotted to the door. Karen bent down to pet him, her face lighting up with delight as she scratched behind his ears. "God, he's such a sweetheart," Karen said, her voice full of affection. Naomi couldn't help but smile as she watched her friend interact with Milo. She had always known how much Karen adored dogs, and seeing her so taken with Milo was a source of quiet joy. Naomi led Karen inside, and they settled in for the night. The apartment was warm, cozy, and inviting, the kind of place where you could immediately feel at home. After changing into more comfortable clothes, they sat on the couch, chatting and catching up on the little details of their lives. It felt like no time had passed at all, and Naomi cherished the moments of ease, feeling grateful for the bond they shared. Eventually, they grew quiet, the conversation slowing as the exhaustion of the evening took over. It was then that Naomi, her eyelids heavy, realized how late it had become. "I think I'm going to head to bed," Naomi said, yawning as she stretched. "Yeah, me too," Karen replied, her voice soft with the weight of the wine. "Thanks for tonight. I had such a great time." "You're welcome," Naomi said with a smile. "I'm glad you came. Let's do this more often, okay?" Karen nodded, and with a final hug, they both made their way to the respective bedrooms. Naomi's room was her sanctuary, the space where she could finally relax after a long day, and she was eager to crawl under the covers. Milo, as usual, was right behind her, settling down at the foot of the bed as she slipped beneath the sheets. The night seemed like it would be just like any other. Naomi closed her eyes, feeling the softness of the sheets against her skin, the familiar weight of sleep tugging at her consciousness. But this night would be different. Something would happen that would change everything. In the dead of night, Naomi was jolted awake by the sudden, piercing sound of Karen's terrified scream. The scream was so raw, so filled with panic, that Naomi's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes shot open, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. For a split second, she didn't know where she was, but as the sound of Karen's frantic cries reached her ears again, Naomi's body shot up from the bed, her heart pounding in her chest. "What happened?" Naomi gasped, her voice trembling as she reached out to her friend. Karen was sitting upright in the bed, clutching her pillow tightly to her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock, and she was visibly trembling. Naomi could feel the rush of fear rising in her own chest, but she fought to keep it in check, trying to focus on her friend. "Karen, what's wrong?" Naomi repeated, her voice softer now, as she moved closer to her friend. Karen's gaze flickered nervously between Naomi and Milo, who was sitting calmly on the bed, his eyes fixed on Karen. There was something eerie about the way Milo was staring at her, something almost unnatural in the intensity of his gaze. "Naomi, I don't know what happened," Karen stammered, her voice shaking. "I woke up and Milo was just sitting there watching me. It was like he was staring right into me, almost like he could see everything. I've never felt so watched. It was terrifying." Naomi felt her blood run cold. She turned her gaze to Milo, who still sat motionless at the foot of the bed, his expression unreadable. She had known him for years, and she had never seen him act this way before. It was almost as though he was waiting for something. "It's just Milo," Naomi said, trying to calm Karen's nerves, though she herself couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her stomach. "He's always been like this. Maybe you just had a nightmare." But Karen wasn't convinced. She shook her head, her face drawn with fear. "No, Naomi. This wasn't a dream. I'm telling you, something was wrong. He wasn't just sitting there, it felt like. He was watching me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something I didn't." Naomi's heart raced as she looked back at Milo. There was a heaviness in the air now, something palpable, like a presence that had entered the room. She had always known that Milo was a smart dog, but this was different. I don't know what to say, Naomi said quietly. She reached out to Karen, who was still visibly shaken, her eyes darting between Naomi and the dog. After a long moment of silence, Karen suddenly stood up, her movements quick and jerky. I have to go, she said in a hushed, almost panicked tone. I need to clear my mind. I don't know what's going on, but I can't stay here. Naomi stood up with her, her confusion deepening. She wasn't sure what had happened, but she couldn't help but feel that something was off, something beyond the ordinary. Karen gave her a quick, tense hug, whispering something about needing time to think before she hurried out of the room. Naomi watched her leave, her thoughts a swirl of confusion and growing concern. She turned back to Milo, who was still sitting there, as calm as ever. For a moment, Naomi wondered if Karen's words had any truth to them, if there was something more to Milo than she had ever realized. Kneeling down beside him, Naomi stroked his fur, feeling the familiar warmth and softness of his coat. What's going on, Milo? She whispered softly. He blinked slowly, but his gaze remained steady, almost as though he understood her question. The room was heavy with silence, and for the first time in a long while, Naomi felt a deep unease settle in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something that had been hidden, until now. Naomi had never really thought much about Milo's behavior before. To her, he had always been just a dog, a companion, a friend. He had been by her side through thick and thin, loyal in ways that only a pet could be. He was a constant presence in her life, quietly watching over her, always waiting by her side when she returned home, his big brown eyes offering a silent reassurance that everything would be okay. He had been the one to sit with her when she cried after a bad day at work, the one who wagged his tail furiously at the door, greeting her with boundless joy no matter how many hours she had been away. Naomi had never suspected that there was more to him than met the eye until that night. The incident with Karen had shaken her. Karen, who had been her closest friend through college, had left in a hurry, terrified by something Naomi couldn't see. Naomi had tried to rationalize it. It had to be a bad dream, she had told herself. Just a nightmare. But as Karen's frightened words echoed in her mind, Naomi couldn't help but feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. Karen had said that Milo had been staring at her, not just watching but observing, as if he knew something that no one else did. The look in Karen's eyes, the fear in her voice, it all felt too real to be dismissed so easily. The problem was, Naomi had never seen anything unusual in Milo's behavior before. He was her dog, and he had always been a little eccentric, but nothing had ever made her question his motives. And yet, after Karen left, Naomi found herself staring at Milo in a way she never had before. He was lying at the foot of the bed, his eyes half closed, but the way his gaze lingered on her made her uneasy. It was as if he could sense her thoughts, as though he was watching her every move with a level of awareness she hadn't previously attributed to him. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself that she was overthinking things. But the more she looked at him, the more the feeling persisted. There was something different in his eyes, something darker and more intense than she had ever noticed before. Milo was not just a dog. At least that was how it seemed to Naomi in that moment. His presence in the room felt heavier, as if it was charged with something she couldn't quite name. Her mind began to race with possibilities. Could it be that she had overlooked something important? Could it be that Karen had been right? Maybe Milo wasn't just a dog, but something more. Naomi's thoughts spiraled as she tried to make sense of the strange sensations she was experiencing. She had always felt a connection to Milo, a deep bond that was more than just the typical pet-owner relationship. But this was different. It felt as though something was wrong. But what could it be? She had never been one for superstitions or paranormal beliefs. She was logical, grounded, skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained by science or reason. But even as she tried to dismiss the unsettling thoughts swirling in her mind, she couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that there was something off about Milo. It wasn't just the way he had been staring at Karen earlier, it was the way he had been watching her in the quiet moments when they were alone. When she would wake up in the morning, feeling inexplicably refreshed, Milo would be there by her side, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt out of place. He seemed to know things that she hadn't told him, things that she couldn't explain. Naomi sat up in bed, her heart racing as she glanced over at Milo. He was still lying at the foot of the bed, his eyes half closed, But this time she noticed the subtle twitch of his ears, the way they perked up ever so slightly as she shifted her position. It was as if he were waiting for something, anticipating her every move. His gaze met hers, and for a brief moment Naomi felt the weight of his stare settle into her chest like a heavy stone. "Milo," Naomi whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What's going on?" The dog didn't respond, of course. He never did. But in that moment, Naomi felt a deep sense of connection, a strange understanding that passed between them. She wasn't sure if it was just her mind playing tricks on her, but she swore that she saw something flicker in his eyes, a flicker of something far too intelligent for a dog. It was as if he understood her words, as if he had the power to respond, but chose not to. The thought sent a chill down her spine. She stood up from the bed, her legs feeling unsteady as she moved toward the window. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint rustling of Milo's fur as he shifted on the bed. Naomi stared out the window into the dark night, her thoughts churning. What if Karen had been right? What if Milo was more than just a dog? It was absurd, she told herself. Absolutely ridiculous. Dogs didn't have that kind of awareness. They didn't think like humans. They didn't observe people in the way Milo seemed to. Yet, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Milo than she had ever realized. Maybe he was just a very intelligent dog, or maybe, she thought with a shiver, there was something else at play here, something supernatural. Something she couldn't explain with logic or reason. The thought unsettled her, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had always felt safe with Milo, as though he was watching over her in ways that went beyond the ordinary. It wasn't just the way he had been staring at Karen. Naomi recalled the mornings when she woke up feeling more rejuvenated than she had any right to feel, despite the scant hours of sleep she had gotten. She would stir from her slumber, and there would be Milo sitting quietly by her side, waiting for her to open her eyes. It had always been comforting, his silent presence a reassurance that she was never truly alone. But now, in the quiet of the night, that same presence felt different. It no longer felt comforting, it felt heavy, as though it was infused with a deeper purpose. Naomi's suspicion continued to grow as she replayed the events of the previous night in her mind. What was it about Milo's stare? Why did he look at her like that? Why did Karen react the way she did? It was as if something inside of her had shifted, and now she could see Milo in a new light. No longer was he just the dog who greeted her with tail wags and licks, he was something else. But what? What was he? The more Naomi thought about it, the more questions piled up. Was it possible that Milo was somehow protecting her? She had always thought of him as a loyal companion, a pet who provided unconditional love and companionship. But could he be more than that? Could he be watching over her in ways she had never fully understood? She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She needed to sleep to reset her mind. But no matter how hard she tried to close her eyes, the feeling of Milo's eyes on her lingered. It was as though he was waiting for something, watching her every move with a patient, knowing gaze. Maybe I'm just imagining things, Naomi muttered to herself. But even as the words left her lips, she knew they weren't true. Deep down, she knew that something was wrong. Something had changed, and it wasn't just her imagination. As the night wore on, Naomi lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with questions and suspicions. She couldn't sleep, not with the unsettling feeling that Milo's gaze was still fixed on her, watching, waiting. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't ignore it any longer. There was something off about Milo's behavior, something that defied logic and reason. And the more she questioned it, the more she feared that the truth was something she wasn't prepared to face. Naomi could feel it in the pit of her stomach, that gnawing sensation, that quiet, insistent whisper of unease that had been with her since Karen's abrupt departure the night before. As much as she tried to dismiss it, to chalk it up to overactive imagination or tired nerves, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and Milo. That something had changed in the air around them, something deeper, something more significant than she had ever been prepared to confront. The day after Karen had left, Naomi found herself scrutinizing every moment she spent with her dog. Each time she glanced at Milo, she felt that strange weight in the air and unspoken awareness, a silent connection that she had never considered before. The way he followed her with his eyes, his steady gaze never wavering as she moved about the apartment, made her feel as though he were watching her, waiting for something. It wasn't just a dog's normal curiosity, it was something else entirely, something that made Naomi question everything she thought she knew about him. That evening, when the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, Naomi was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping her tea in a rare moment of quiet. Milo lay at her feet, as he often did, his head resting on his paws. But tonight something felt different. The silence in the apartment felt heavier, laden with questions. Naomi's mind wandered back to the strange sensation she had experienced in the early hours of the morning, the inexplicable lightness, the sudden sense of well-being that seemed to fill her chest each time she woke up. She had assumed it was just the result of a good night's sleep, but now, with the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together in her mind, Naomi began to wonder if it had something to do with Milo, if somehow he was responsible for that sense of calm, that inexplicable peace that seemed to envelope her each morning. She had always known Milo to be a loyal companion, a dog that was fiercely affectionate, quick to greet her at the door, and eager to curl up beside her whenever she felt sad. But what if he was more than just a pet? What if his role in her life was more profound than she had ever imagined? What if he was not only a companion but a protector, someone or something that had been watching over her all along? Naomi's heart began to race as the realization hit her. It was as if the fog had cleared, and she could see everything with terrifying clarity. Milo wasn't just a dog. He wasn't just a pet who loved her unconditionally. There was something otherworldly about him, something that went beyond the simple biology of a loyal animal. He had been with her through every moment of her life, her triumphs, her failures, her heartbreaks, and in a way he had always been there to safeguard her, to ensure that nothing would happen to her. She had felt it in the way he would always find his way to her side whenever she needed him, in the way his presence seemed to calm her when her anxiety flared up, in the way he would rest at her feet when she was sick, silently offering his support without saying a word. But it wasn't just about comfort anymore. No, something deeper had awakened within Naomi, something primal, something she couldn't quite explain. Milo was not just offering her emotional support, he was ensuring her safety, in ways that she had never fully grasped before. And in that moment, Naomi knew that he was more than just a pet, he was a guardian, a silent, watchful protector who had been keeping her safe all along. The realization brought a flood of emotions. Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at Milo, who was now watching her intently, his eyes unwavering. It was as though he had known all along that she would figure it out, that she would come to understand his true purpose in her life. His calm presence felt like an anchor, holding her steady even as her mind raced. How could she have been so blind? How could she have missed the signs, the quiet gestures that had always hinted at his true role in her life? Her mind began to replay the past few months, and she realized that there had been so many small moments that she had overlooked. There were the nights when she had felt particularly vulnerable, when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear, and there, lying by her side, was Milo, his presence grounding her, his warmth offering comfort. There were the mornings when she awoke feeling lighter, more energized, as if the weariness of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. Milo had been there, sitting at the edge of the bed, waiting for her to open her eyes, his steady gaze never leaving her. It was almost as if he had been guarding her dreams, watching over her as she slept, ensuring that she was safe from whatever shadows might lurk in the night. The more Naomi thought about it, the more the truth became undeniable. Milo had always been her protector. It wasn't just about the comfort he offered during the rough patches of her life, it was about the way he had been there, always, when she needed him most. It was the way he would sit at the door during storms, never once faltering in his vigilance, ensuring that she was safe. It was the way he would bark when he sensed someone approaching the apartment, warning her of a potential threat before she even knew it was there. Naomi felt a surge of gratitude rise within her, and before she knew it, she was on her knees in front of Milo, her arms wrapped around his furry body as she pressed her face into his soft coat. The tears came freely now, as the weight of everything she had just realized settled upon her. Milo, the dog she had always loved and cherished, was so much more than just a pet. He was her guardian, her protector, her silent sentinel, standing watch over her every day, ensuring that she was safe, that nothing could harm her. Milo, she whispered through her tears, her voice thick with emotion. I never knew. I never understood, but now I do. You've been watching over me this whole time. "Thank you." Milo responded in his usual quiet way, his tail wagging gently as he nuzzled her cheek, offering comfort without words. Naomi held him tightly, feeling the deep, unbreakable bond between them. It was a bond that went beyond the ordinary. It was a bond forged in trust, in love, and in a shared understanding that she had only just begun to comprehend. That night, Naomi slept peacefully, her mind quiet and at ease for the first time in days. She had always known that Milo brought her comfort, but now she understood the true extent of his role in her life. He was more than just a pet, he was her protector, her guide, and her unwavering source of strength. And she vowed, from that moment on, to never take him for granted again. When she woke up the next morning, the familiar sense of rejuvenation washed over her once more. But this time, it wasn't a mysterious force that was lifting her fatigue. This time, Naomi knew exactly what it was. It was Milo, her steadfast protector, standing watch over her as she slept, ensuring that she was safe, that nothing could harm her. And as she looked down at him, his wise eyes meeting hers, Naomi knew that she was never truly alone. She smiled softly, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "Thank you, Milo," she whispered. "Thank you for always being there." And in that moment, as the sunlight streamed through the window and bathed the room in warmth, Naomi knew that no matter what came her way, she would always have Milo by her side, watching over her, keeping her safe, as he had always done. Naomi had always thought of Milo as a companion, a beloved dog who brightened her days with his affectionate presence and comforting silence. He had been a fixture in her life for as long as she could remember, a loyal friend who never wavered, a steady source of companionship in a world that often felt chaotic. Yet, as the days went by, something had changed. She couldn't pinpoint when it had started, but the more she observed him, the more she began to notice that Milo was not just the cheerful pet she had always thought he was. There was a quiet depth to him, an unspoken understanding that resonated with her in ways she had never truly realized. Slowly, as though a veil was lifting from her eyes, Naomi began to understand that Milo wasn't just a dog, he was something far more significant. It was in the small moments, the details that had once slipped past her, unnoticed. It was the way Milo would sit by the door during thunderstorms, his ears alert, his eyes trained on the windows, as though waiting for something or someone. It was the way he would pace restlessly at night, his movements deliberate and purposeful, as if he were guarding the apartment from invisible threats. And then there were the mornings. Naomi had always woken up feeling unexpectedly refreshed, as though her body had been granted a restorative slumber that it had not earned. But now she realized that was not the result of a perfect night's sleep or some miraculous force. No, it was Milo. It was his vigilant presence that had kept her safe, that had ensured her peace even while she slept. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, a simple trick of the mind, perhaps. She had always been a little anxious, a little restless, and maybe her body had simply learned to compensate for the sleep she lacked. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. She had never felt the full weight of Milo's watchful gaze until now. He wasn't just a dog who lay at her feet. He was a silent guardian, standing watch over her as she slept, guarding her dreams, keeping watch over her well-being in ways that she hadn't fully understood before. As Naomi sat in the quiet of her apartment one evening, watching Milo curl up by the window, she found herself lost in thought. She hadn't spoken to Karen in days, but the events of that night, the strange sensation that Karen had experienced, kept replaying in her mind. Karen's terror when she had woken up to find Milo staring at her had unsettled Naomi in ways she couldn't describe. She had brushed it off at the time, chalking it up to a bad dream or a misunderstanding. But now, the more she thought about it, the more Naomi couldn't ignore the truth that was unfolding before her. Milo's role in her life was not merely one of affection and companionship. There was something deeper, something more profound. Milo had always been by her side, through the highs and lows of her life, through moments of heartbreak, loneliness, and joy. She had never questioned why he was so consistently there. He was just a dog, after all, her dog, her best friend. But now, as she reflected on his behavior, Naomi began to understand that Milo had always been far more aware of her emotions, her needs, and her vulnerabilities than she had ever realized. He knew when she was anxious, when she was sad, when she needed a comforting presence. He seemed to sense when she was on the brink of a breakdown, when her exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, and he would always be there, sitting quietly beside her, offering his silent support. But it wasn't just emotional support. It was more. It was physical, too. Milo had been watching over her, ensuring her safety, even when she hadn't been aware of it. The realization came to Naomi slowly, as she began to piece together the subtle signs. She thought back to the times when she had woken up feeling unnaturally calm, as if some invisible force had been watching over her during the night. It had been so subtle, so effortless, that she hadn't noticed it before. It was as if the night had passed by in a protective, comforting cocoon. She thought of the times when Milo had been right by her side, sitting alert by the door or curled up on the bed, watching over her as she slept. She remembered the way he would nudge her hand when she was upset, the way he would sit patiently by her side when she was working late into the night, offering his presence as a silent reassurance. All of these little things that she had once brushed off as normal dog behavior suddenly felt like pieces of a larger puzzle. Milo had been protecting her all along. Naomi realized that Milo's vigilance went beyond simple instinct. He was not just reacting to his environment as a typical dog would. No, he was watching over her with purpose, with a deep, almost inexplicable understanding of her needs. He had been there in the quiet moments when Naomi had felt overwhelmed, when the weight of the world had seemed too much to bear. Milo had known when to offer his presence and when to stay quietly by her side, as if he could sense the exact moment when she needed him most. In the mornings, when she awoke feeling light and at peace, it was his watchful eyes that had been keeping her safe. And in the stillness of the night, when she had slept more soundly than she ever had before, it was Milo who had stood guard. It wasn't just about protection from physical threats, Naomi realized. It was about emotional safety too. Milo had been there not just as a pet, but as a protector of her spirit. He had kept her grounded when her mind had been spinning. He had kept her calm when her anxiety had threatened to take over. He had offered her something more than companionship. He had offered her security, peace, and love in a way that she hadn't fully understood until now. As the days passed, Naomi began to notice even more details that she had missed before. She realized that Milo's presence was not just a passive one. It was active, deliberate, and filled with intention. He didn't simply sit by her side, he watched her with an intensity that was both comforting and unnerving. His gaze never wavered, as if he were constantly scanning the environment, making sure that everything around them was safe. It wasn't paranoia, no, it was a quiet assurance, a deep knowing that Naomi could feel, even if she couldn't articulate it. She remembered how, on the night Karen had stayed over, Milo had been particularly alert, pacing around the room, his eyes darting to the door and the window as though expecting something. Naomi had dismissed it at the time as a dog being restless, but now in hindsight she wondered if Milo had sensed something that Karen had felt but couldn't explain. Karen's fear that night had been so palpable, so real, and Naomi couldn't ignore the fact that Milo had been at the center of it. His unblinking gaze, his calm yet intense presence, had unsettled Karen. And in a way, Naomi realized it had unsettled her too. It was as if Milo had been guarding something, protecting them from something unseen, something unknown. Now, more than ever, Naomi felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward Milo. He was not just a pet, not just an animal that provided comfort. He was a silent guardian, watching over her every day, every night. He had been there when she needed him most, even when she didn't know it. And now Naomi understood that he would always be there, his vigilance never wavering, his protection unspoken but always present. With this new understanding, Naomi felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted, and she could finally breathe fully, deeply. She wasn't alone. She had Milo. She had always had him. And with him by her side, Naomi knew that she would never have to face the world alone again. No matter what came her way, Milo would be there, standing watch, his vigilant presence ensuring that she was safe, protected, and loved. And in that knowledge, Naomi found the peace she had been searching for all along. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Naomi would begin her quiet ritual. It wasn't a grand affair, nor was it marked by any significant event, yet for Naomi, It had become the most profound part of her day, a ritual of gratitude that centered around the one being who had unknowingly become her protector. The apartment was usually peaceful during these hours, the world outside muted by the gentle hum of the city and the quiet rustling of leaves in the trees. Naomi would often find herself lost in thought, preparing dinner or tidying up, her mind inevitably drifting to the realization that had taken root in her heart. Milo, her dog, had been far more than she had ever imagined. He had always been by her side, offering comfort in times of loneliness, joy in moments of sadness. But now, with the understanding that he had been silently watching over her, Naomi felt an overwhelming sense of connection and awe. Each night as the evening settled in and the house grew still, Naomi would look over at Milo, who would be lounging comfortably in his favorite spot by the window. His calm presence, his knowing eyes filled her with a deep, unspoken appreciation. In his silence, she found a voice, a quiet but powerful acknowledgement that he was with her, always. It was then that Naomi realized she needed to express her gratitude, not just in passing, not just in thought, but in a deliberate, meaningful way. And so she began a small ritual, a simple yet profound act of thanks that would connect her with Milo and honor the role he played in her life. The first step of this ritual was always the same. Naomi would pause whatever she was doing, take a deep breath, and sit down beside Milo. She would look into his eyes, those steady, wise eyes that had seen so much more than she could ever comprehend. In the quiet of the room, she would speak softly, almost in a whisper, as if the words were sacred. "Thank you, Milo," she would say, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for watching over me. Thank you for being my protector." There were no grand speeches, no long soliloquies. The words were simple, but they were filled with meaning. Each one carried a weight of gratitude that had been building in her heart for days, weeks, and even months. Milo would often respond with a slow blink, his gaze never leaving hers, as if acknowledging her words in his own way. There was a gentle reassurance in his silence, a quiet confirmation that he understood. Naomi would reach out and gently stroke the soft fur on his head, letting her fingers sink into the warmth of his coat. The tactile sensation grounded her, reminding her that this bond was real, tangible, and unbreakable. As she caressed him, she would speak softly again, telling him how much his presence meant to her, how deeply she appreciated his loyalty and watchfulness. In these moments, Naomi found a deep sense of peace. The worries of the day, the stresses, the uncertainties, the noise seemed to melt away. It was as though she had entered a sacred space, one that was marked not by grand gestures or formal ceremonies, but by the quiet intimacy of two beings who understood each other without words. For Naomi, this simple act of gratitude was a form of healing. It was a way to honor Milo for everything he had done for her, whether it was protecting her during the night, offering comfort when she was sad, or simply being a constant presence in her life. As the weeks passed, the ritual began to evolve. It wasn't just a moment of thanks anymore, it became a space where Naomi reflected on her life, her experiences, and the many ways Milo had shaped her world. Each evening, she would think about the times when she had felt vulnerable, unsure, or frightened, and each time, Milo had been there, by her side, offering his silent protection. It was as if her mind and heart had begun to process the depth of his presence, understanding that his role in her life was far more than just a pet's companionship. He was her guardian, in every sense of the word, and the gratitude she felt for him now ran deeper than she had ever imagined. Milo, for his part, never seemed to tire of these quiet moments. His presence remained as steady as ever, his unwavering gaze always fixed on her with the same calm assurance. There was a peacefulness in the way he responded, in the way he allowed Naomi to express her gratitude without expectation or demand. His only response was his constant companionship, his gentle affection, and the quiet, steady rhythm of his breathing that accompanied her through these moments of introspection. One evening, as Naomi sat beside Milo, her hand resting on his head as she spoke her nightly thanks, a thought occurred to her. She realized that this ritual had become something more than just an expression of gratitude. It had become a form of connection. Through this ritual, she had come to understand something that had been there all along but had eluded her for so long, that the bond between them was not just about companionship. It was about trust, about safety, about an unspoken promise that they had made to each other without ever truly acknowledging it. For Naomi, this realization was profound. She had never truly thought about the depth of the relationship she shared with Milo. She had always seen him as her loyal dog, her best friend, but now she saw him as a protector, a guardian who had been watching over her in ways she hadn't even realized. It wasn't just the times when he sat by her side, offering comfort. It was the moments when he had kept her safe, when he had ensured that she could rest, that she could feel secure, even when she hadn't known how vulnerable she truly was. The ritual of gratitude became a way to honor this unspoken bond, to give thanks for the protection and love that Milo had offered her in ways she could not have understood before. It was more than just a nightly routine, it was a recognition of the depth of their connection, a quiet acknowledgement that in his own way Milo had always been there for her. Naomi understood that she would never be able to fully repay him for everything he had done. But through her nightly ritual, she hoped to give him something that expressed, in the simplest way possible, how much his presence meant to her. As time passed, Naomi found herself looking forward to these moments of reflection and gratitude. They had become a peaceful sanctuary in her otherwise hectic life, a time to connect with her own emotions and to honor the deep, silent bond that she shared with Milo. There was a quiet strength in these moments, a sense of serenity that filled her heart and soul. And as she looked into Milo's eyes each night, as she whispered her thanks, she felt something shift within her. She realized that, in giving thanks, she had also found a deeper understanding of herself and the life she shared with Milo. The ritual was more than just a routine, it had become a reminder that gratitude, in its purest form, could heal. It was an acknowledgement of love, of trust, and of the quiet strength that came from knowing you were never truly alone. And so, Naomi continued the ritual, each night with a heart full of appreciation, knowing that Milo would always be there to guide her, to protect her, and to remind her that no matter what, she was never alone. The ritual became a cornerstone of her life, a practice she would carry with her for as long as she and Milo shared their journey together. Through it, Naomi found not only peace and gratitude, but a deeper connection to the one being who had, in his own quiet way, shaped her life in ways she could never have fully understood before. And as she whispered her thanks each night, she knew that this simple act was her way of honoring the guardian who had always been by her side.